How do you learn to code without a computer? Well, the Nelson Mandela University has got it figured out. It's upskilling young people using unplugged coding games. The partnership between the university, Lever Foundation and AWS and Communities has already reached 16,000 pupils. Let's get more from the project's coordinator, Professor Jean Greyling. Professor Greyling, thank you very much for your time this evening. So tell us a little bit about the background behind this project, which has been running since 2017.
Yes, before 2017, thanks for the opportunity. Have been involved in marketing our discipline to students across the province, obviously often in rural areas or in townships, and often you became aware that when you go into a school where there's no computers and you talk about computer programming, you're talking into a vacuum. The learners have no understanding of what you're talking about. And then often my students at varsity would come to me and say, Prof, you need to go back to our schools. You need to go into the townships, into the rural areas and tell them about coding. And then in 2017, when Byron Batterson, my honours student, came to me with this idea about the tanks coding game, where we don't need computers and we can introduce coding concepts to learners, I was obviously very excited. And we saw the potential. We launched the project at the end of 2017 with tanks as the pilot app. Since then, we've launched Rangers, which focus on game poaching and coding, and then boats on marine pollution. And up till the start of this year, we've already reached 25,000 learners across South Africa, and we've distributed 500 kits to schools, mainly in disadvantaged communities, which allows the schools to actually start coding clubs, implement coding in their lesson plans without needing a computer laboratory. So that is where we were at the start of this year.
And the fact that resources are a problem, is that the only reason why unplugged or offline coding is important in South Africa, or are there other reasons?
That's very interesting. Up till about a few months ago, I thought it's just resources. The fact that we, for example, in South Africa, have 16,000 schools without laboratories, and then there's thousands of schools that don't have, that have just functional labs. But I came across a research in Kenya, and everyone says this is true for the rest of Africa. It's not just resources. Schools all over Africa often struggle with electricity, with internet connectivity. A very interesting thing which I've seen is that teachers are very easily intimidated by laptops and PCs if they've never worked on them. And then you have obviously the issues of security, of having technical staff to maintain your laboratories, and then just the fact that computers are simply just very expensive, including with that the robotics that you sometimes need. So it's much wider than just not having a lab. There are many other issues that bog down thousands of schools across our country and across our continent.
Is this project just about coding?
Definitely not. Again, when I started in 2017, we said we can introduce learners to coding. But it's obvious. There is a shortage of software developers in South Africa and growing all over Africa. So it's obvious that we want to have some learners that choose software development as a career, because our economy is desperately in need of many more graduates. But anyone can just go and Google 21st century skills. And coding will often be one of 10 or 15. There's other skills like group work or problem solving, strategy, communication, listening, talking. You can just go on and on. And we strongly believe that this unplugged way of teaching coding and problem solving to learners is often actually much more effective than putting them in a lab in front of a screen. So it's much more than coding. I always say to schools, especially primary schools, we don't need software developers from you that arrive at our computer science department. Out of a class of 240, we probably have 10 that have IT at school. But we do need matriculants and learners that can solve problems and that can think through problems. And that's where unplugged coding, I think, is just as effective as using a computer laboratory.
So you've reached 16,000 learners through the project during February and March. Tell us some of the encouraging stories that have come out of those engagements.
Yes, when you reach 16,000 learners, the first obvious encouraging story is the way that we call them coding evangelists. We had about 30 to 40 going into communities, the way they took ownership of this project. And for me, that is probably one of the most encouraging things, because they could see that they were making a difference in schools and in communities. And they were not only going into schools. You'll see some of the photos, some of our people would go onto the streets. In some cases, they would go to soccer games and play the game with kids before they go and play soccer. There's a very encouraging story from Jeffreys Bay, where the coding evangelist went to a bunch of kids next to the street and actually found that some of them were using substances, and she got them playing. And the one little boy, actually, when his friend said no, they must go, he was persistent that he wanted to carry on. And he played right till the end. In Lichtenburg, a village near Lichtenburg, the kids, also soccer kids, they come and they play the game and do the coding after each game. And our coding evangelist there tells us that some of them actually come earlier so that they can start playing before the game. And then one of the most encouraging ones is our group traveled up to Beaufort West from Mitchell's Plain, came across a bus that was broken down 100 km outside of Beaufort West, told the driver to stop, and they started introducing the coding game to the kids on the bus next to the road on your way to Beaufort West. It ended up that these kids were actually from abusive backgrounds, and the facilitator was so excited about the impact that this game could have on them. So once again, it's not just coding, there's many other things that happen.
Sounds like a lot of soft skills are imparted as part of that journey. So where to next? What are some of the future outcomes or the future vision for coding for this project?
Yeah, we stopped with the drive to reach 16,000 at the end of March. And what's really pleasing is that we're getting photos still from all our evangelists, is that how many schools and NGOs have now started coding clubs in communities where there would never have been any coding. We just had one yesterday that started in Fishhoek. And we've got a coding club in Tsomo in the Eastern Cape. And all over the country, coding clubs are starting. And then we're also finding schools that don't have computers are actually now having what they call 30 minutes of code every week in the official timetable, which is also very exciting. But for what's next, we've reached the 16,000, but it becomes very superficial if you just chase numbers. So we've scaled that down. We're consolidating now with those same learners, but we're also focusing on their teachers. So this term is a term of teacher training. We're in negotiations with organizations that work in schools, and if everything goes according to plan, probably around 20,000 teachers will be trained with unplugged coding by mid-August. And then we're building up to a huge event on Mandela Day, the 18th of July, where we want to have at least 10 tournaments all over the country in unplugged coding. And I think it's going to be very easy to get 1,000 to 2,000 learners participating in a coding tournament on Mandela Day. And I would really encourage people that want to join us to contact me. It's very easy to get tournaments going all over South Africa. And then the big dream for the future is we want to be in all of those 16,000 schools, because we honestly believe that if you're not in them, those learners and their teachers are simply missing out on the fourth industrial revolution. And as a government and as a country and as a computer science department, we shouldn't sleep until that happens. And then we strongly believe that we have a solution from Africa for Africa. And we're already starting with a footprint in some African countries. And my ultimate dream is in 5-6 years that we're all over Africa introducing kids in remotest villages to coding.
Well, very exciting stuff in the pipeline. That project called Coding for Youth, and that was Associate Professor at the Nelson Mandela University, Professor Jean Greyling, telling us a little bit more about the aims of that project.